In this episode of Investors and Operators, I am chatting with Pardis Nasseri, who is the chairman and CEO of Palm Tree. We're going to cover a lot of topics, everything from mission, culture, the background on the firm, and we're going to get into some fun topics that we'll save for the interview. But Pardis, it is awesome to have you here. If you wouldn't mind, can you give a little bit of background on Palm Tree?
Hey, Jordan, nice to see you. And I'm a big fan of your podcast and very excited that we're doing this together today. Happy to tell you about Palm Tree. It's a investment banking and M&A. It's an M&A firm at the highest level. And then we have two different divisions. We have a consulting division and an investment banking division that we started a few years later. A few years ago. Our tagline is that we are the modern M&A advisor. And what makes us unique in that is we do have this consulting business, which is the oldest part of the company. It's been around since 2010 when I founded the company, and it's sort of grown significantly. And we decided to sort of diversify our offerings and brought on investment banking, and we're looking at adding additional stuff. But really, on the consulting side, we work with private equity firms, some of the big firms that you would know if I were to name them. And on the investment banking side, we work with mid-market business owners to help them through some strategic event. What makes us really unique is that we do have the consultants that work with private equity firms, so we can be a one-stop shop to business owners and kind of help them anticipate, prepare, and navigate any sort of challenges that are involved in any strategic process, whether it be a dividend recap or a full sale.
And just kind of size and shape, how many people are in the firm? What locations?
We're about 125 professionals, and if you count our independent contractors, that number goes up a little bit higher. We have our core offices are LA and Chicago, LA being the largest. We have people in Detroit and Dallas. We're building offices around them. And then we're looking at additional markets in the country to expand into over the next 6 to 18 months as we plan on growing. Our overall plan is to grow 4x in the next 5 years.
Well, maybe before we go to some of the questions around, building team culture, I'd love to learn more about your story. Like, let's go all the way back. Where you're from, the story growing up.
Sure, happy to. I'm Persian. Iranian Persian, and like most Iranians, everybody escaped Iran after the revolution. My family, unfortunately, didn't get that memo. I was born in Chicago. My dad was finishing his final degree, and then in '79 we moved back to Iran. A couple of months later, the revolution hit, and we got stuck. So I lived, 9 years in a war zone in Iran. And it was in Tehran. It was pretty rough. And eventually my father escaped through the UAE and my mom and I escaped through Turkey, and we came and landed in LA and started with nothing. So, true immigrant story of basically starting a new life here in America and starting from scratch. My dad was in his 40s and it's difficult for him at that point to start from scratch. And most of my family are doctors and lawyers and engineers, very much academics and folks that are not entrepreneurs. And for me, it was determined when I was a young kid that I was going to be a doctor like everybody else in the family, but it just didn't jive for me. I chemistry class at UC Santa Barbara, I decided that, this isn't for me. And then the journey started up trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I took many twists and turns. And eventually, I think all along, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur at heart, but I just didn't really know it. And I went into public accounting out of UC Santa Barbara because that was the really only option available to me in finance. Worked there for about 7 years, 3 years in audit and 4 years in transaction services, which is where I got to really learn and understand what the field of M&A was all about. And that was in LA and Miami with PwC. And then I went on to work in investment banking in New York at Jefferies, and, not having to do with my ability to tell the future, but I actually left investment banking in May of 2008 and came to LA and worked at a private equity fund right as the world melted. And that was Platinum Equity. And I was there for about 3 years, and it was perfect time to be there. It was like dog years. We had just closed the fund, or Platinum had closed the fund. There was a lot of opportunity in the marketplace because of the dislocation and the crash. And I was working like a madman, single, and so I really had no reason to not work. And that's what I did. Basically sometimes 7 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day, and did all that. And then in 2010, I kind of was at a crossroads where I had in my mind, I could have gone two different directions. One was that I would work my way up inside platinum, or the other one, I was go out and do my own thing. And for me, going and do my own thing seemed like the easier option, because there's only one person to blame if things don't work out. It's me. Whereas if you're at a big organization, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to come above you in terms of leadership, how people are going to respond to you. So I decided to just bet on myself, and I left and started Palm Tree. It wasn't easy going the first iteration. So the first 6 years, we really didn't have a focus, didn't have alignment with my former partner. We weren't sure what we were doing. We were trying to do too many things. And then I restructured the firm in 2016. And that's the beginning of what we call Palm Tree 2.0. And we started, and now we are. So really all the growth we've had are since like January 1st, 2017, because at that point we were 6 people, 7 if you include me, 4 independent contractors and 2 employees. Fast forward to today, we are, over 125 people, and it's been a fun ride getting here.
Yeah. Well, there are so many things to dive deeper into for that story. Maybe I'd like to start with this idea of, the version 1.0 versus 2.0, because a lot of times when you're starting a business, you have to do everything just to keep the lights on. And
That's right.
It's tough to decide what do you truly focus on. And this idea of FOMO, right? If you look at our business, we're really, really good at videos, LinkedIn content, strategy, but could we be good at PR? Could we go from our $25,000 to $50,000 websites to 50 to 100 plus? Should we spend our time developing these different services? Or do you spend a certain number of years just going down like your core power alleys versus becoming that one-stop shop? What was it like for you? Because there are so many different investment banking services, accounting services, et cetera. What was the decision like for you guys, and what were some of the trade-offs?
So I did exactly what you said. I mean, we had FOMO, and in version 1.0, it was, I took every meeting and responded to every email and reached out to everybody that I knew. And for me, it proved to be not that great, because there's a finite amount of time, and there's an infinite amount of networks and contacts and places you can go and meetings you can have if you're a sort of extrovert and focused on building relationships, which is sort of my personality. And that's why Palm Tree 1.0 was so much confusion. Not to mention, it was 3 of us, really, me, and then I had a partner, and he and I didn't see eye to eye. And so when I restructured and bought, after 5 years of operating history and looking at, we had these different business units, I sort of sat down and I started evaluating everything, because in 2016, my wife and I were expecting our first child. And up until that point, it was rough, Jordan. I qualified for Medicare, or Medi-Cal, whatever it is. I had 0 income. When I was dating my wife, there was a point where I actually bounced my credit card buying coffee, and this homeless lady paid for my coffee in downtown LA where I was living. So like, you talk about hitting bottom, it was nothing available in terms of cash. That's where I was. So, and
that resonates like basically precisely on what we experienced, and on the same timeline. In 2016, we had our first child, our daughter, and we went to a 450 square foot apartment, and my Chinese in-laws were with us for 6 of those months. I'm like, what in the hell just happened to me? I was doing investment banking. Wife is doing law. I'm failing as a father. We sent our daughter when she was 18 months old to China to be there for 4 months so we could focus on the business. And like, I literally have like that journal of like $50 in the bank account.
Yeah.
How did you bounce back?
Congratulations to you for being able to do that and grow out of that. I mean, this is very scary. It's very frightening. And I'm fortunate that I have an amazing wife, and she is she's a clinical psychologist. She's far smarter and more educated than I am. And we started dating while I was going through this, and she kind of saw me sort of, if you graph, hopes and aspiration and then reality kind of like this, she saw me at like the height of my hopes and aspirations, and then I crashed because the hopes and aspirations realized what the reality was and how things were going. And so she was very supportive. She had a good job. She was helping basically support me, while I was trying to build the business. And she was also more than that. She was kind of like a coach, kind of reminding me that this reality that I'm living in isn't my reality, because you can get stuck in a situation and you feel like you're in this rut and you're like, that's it. Like, I'm coming to work, I'm answering my emails, doing what I got to do, and I'm leaving, and I got to do this. Like, you don't have time to actually stop and go, wait a minute, what does it all mean? So when we found out that my wife was pregnant, or we were trying to have our kid, our first child, I sort of looked myself in the mirror and I said, look, pull it together. It's okay to live off of your wife and not make a lot of money, but you can't be like that when you have a kid. And you had a great job. You've had many great jobs in the past. You made a lot of money. You do really good money. You can always go back. So really determine if you're going to go back or if you're going to do this. And I sat down and went through it. It was like, honestly, a math problem, right? I sat down and I sort of built a model that showed how much income I've foregone to get to this as of this date, and what these businesses would have to be worth in order for me to justify how to continue this path. And like, you ran the math and you're like, okay, this is the number that it has to be at this point in the future. Is it going to get there? And I'm like, no, it's not. So then I said, all right, let me now evaluate if my assumptions are wrong. And it was a year-long process where, like, the first quarter I started sort of digging into everything that I had with my former partner. Second quarter, I hired a strategy consultant to make sure that I wasn't being emotional about this. So like, we sat down and kind of went through everything, because I didn't want to react. My former partner was my former best friend. We lived together when we started a business. And third quarter, we started negotiating and discussions about separating. We pretty quickly deadlocked. We had to use a mediator, and that was the last time I saw him. I haven't seen him since then, and we haven't spoken. And I bought him out and started Palm Tree 1.0. And it's amazing once you focus on one thing in the business and you reinvest the cash flows that business generates, and you ask for help and reach out to people and try to bounce things off of folks. And it's phenomenal, like, how successful you can be. And our number one focus was always transaction services. So that was my background, doing due diligence for private equity firms. And so that's the first product we offered, and that's what I continued doing. And through luck, we kind of started getting into another product, which was a lot of the post-close product, which was sort of, our biggest client at that time was, they're still one of our big clients, but it was my former employer. So it was very simple. My friends would call and say, hey, we just bought this company. We need help. Can you guys come on site and help us with the transition? And that is now known as, transition and transformation services. That's known as post-close work, that many firms are doing it. And it's become this thing that it's top of mind for private equity firms, because they can't hire that many people to help them with these. So they outsource this work. And for us, we had a very strong relationship with the one client, and then started we're doing that work and leveraging all that, leveraging the growth from there, and continue to reinvest in hiring people. And you should remember, I was used to living on very little income, so I wasn't taking any money out. So I would just keep reinvesting in the business to kind of get to that critical scale.
Yeah. We can go on there a ton of directions in this, but I want to go back to this idea of partnership, because I've had very similar experiences where I hired my friend of 31 years, the reason why I started the first nonprofit, amazing friendship going into it. But in that business at the time, the first business Dad made, and it didn't work well. With the first nonprofit, amazing 2 or 3 years starting that off. Co-founder and I had a split. Now we're on awesome terms now. But on our third thing with my wife and I with 51 Labs, it's a completely different partnership and it's amazing. Complementary, like we love being around each other. So I'm trying to think like what are the principles that people can apply to potentially have a successful friend and or family member working together, because there is that deep trust. Like what are maybe some of your key takeaways from that experience? I know
So
I
I have,
needed clear roles and responsibilities, which we didn't have because we didn't know what the hell we were creating.
yeah. So I would say that for me, I talk about this very topic once a year at UCLA Anderson. I give a lecture in an entrepreneurship class, and it's on managing professional service organizations. And at the end, I have some key takeaways. The one thing I will never do again is I will never be a 50-50 partner with anybody. Full stop. So that's not gonna happen. Somebody needs to have control and needs to be in the seat. That's my view on it. And as far as if you are going to go and do a 50-50 partnership, or if you're going to bring any partners that are going to be more than a small amount that are just silent money or whatever, you have to make sure that at the highest level your goals are aligned. You both want the same thing, and you're both very clear about that. Two, you respect one another. You can't have a meeting and then walk back and say, Jordan's an idiot. I'm just going to discount what he says. In his face, I'm going to say he's great, but then I'm going to go back and do whatever I want or not listen to him. And then three, which is equally as important here, is that I think you have to work well together and understand that you can't both be in the number one seat together. You have to, even if you have to divide and conquer things. And to your point, that clear list of roles and responsibilities has to be there. And that is hard to do that if you're both, co-founders, co-CEOs, whatever it is, right? And because, there's a lot of people that do entrepreneurship for ego, and the ego doesn't let you defer to somebody else to be the number one role.
And that kind of brings up one of the other questions I had written down, which is, you know, how has your idea of entrepreneurship and the reason why you pursue this path evolved over the years? And for context, when I started this in 2016, like the life of an entrepreneur kind of thing, like it was, oh, this is amazing. I get to do everything myself and all the things you see in the headlines and the reasons. I'm like, but now it's completely evolved. Now, in 2024 versus 2017. So I'm curious to understand or curious to learn how your motivation and reason for being an entrepreneur might have evolved.
Yeah, so I call myself the accidental entrepreneur in that, because I sort of left Platinum with my former partner, and the goal wasn't for us to have a consulting or M&A firm like this. We were trying to be a investment firm, and we were looking at buying companies for cheap and selling them, buying them low and selling them high, and not really having thought that strategy through as to how we were going to do that. And I think that goes back to my partner and I've seen eye to eye. And it took me a while to realize, hey, I have a business here that I own majority portion of, and I can do exactly what I was planning on doing with a private equity strategy with somebody else's money and take 20% of the growth. Whereas here I've got a majority piece. So then that led me down the path of like, oh, well, maybe I'm an entrepreneur. And I kind of started looking at it. And, I think a lot of people confusing being an entrepreneur with having ideas and having a great idea. And ideas are great, but ideas are a dime a dozen, and you look at, and so, yes, there's once in a while people come up with an idea that nobody else had, but I guarantee you somebody somewhere at some point has thought that. What defines, what's the distinction between the successful entrepreneur and not is, do you have the stamina and the ability to actually go and execute that and operate that. And so for me, I was in this role for a while as the operator and as its leader, and I wasn't actually even calling myself its CEO. Is up until the beginning of 2018, I was, by the end of 22, I was just managing director and president because, I was actually still working and out in the marketplace and in sort of selling work, and then also trying to run the business at the same time. And a couple of things happened in 22 where I joined YPO, and then I also enrolled into a program at a business school where it's designed for people like me and you who are entrepreneurs who founded their companies and they've grown it, and they don't have a formal MBA, and they don't have the time to sit down and get an MBA for 2 or 3 or 4 years or whatever it is, because it doesn't matter. But it teaches you the same frameworks and an abridged version tailoring towards what you really need to know as an entrepreneur to kind of grow the business. And that was like mind blowing. And so was being in YPO, and just kind of realizing there are people that are CEOs and they're not working nearly as much as I am. And I had this concept of like, oh, I'm the top executive, so I have to be working harder than everybody in terms of like longer hours and putting more time in. So I was kept filling my plate. But when you do that, you're not able to, going back to my earlier example, you're not able to like sort of pull up and kind of really see what's going on and really spend time and reflect and think about things, because as like the top leader in the company, your job isn't 9 to 5 coming in, answering emails and leaving. Your job requires a lot of thinking, a lot of reflection, a lot of research, a lot of discussion, all that stuff. So I came out of those programs and I realized I'm still in the program, actually graduating in October, and it's been phenomenal for me because I realize who I am and who I'm not. I have a lot of great ideas. I can sit down, and if I had to come up with a new business plan, I probably could. But I'm not that serial entrepreneur where I want to just sell this company and go on to the next one and go on to the next one. That's not how I'm wired. I like legacy, and the reason I'm building this company is for me, I want to look back on my dying day, not to how much money I've got in my bank account, but to the fact that I can say, hey, you see that company that's so great that everybody loves and everybody works at? I started it, and I helped build it and get it to that point. And I'm fully aware that there's only so much I can do as a person, because for every stage of growth, you need different skills in every role, right? And sometimes you can adapt and learn, but sometimes it's just better to hire somebody else that can do it. So I think the path that you're seeing with Palm Tree, with me becoming, CEO and president, and then now just chairman and CEO, is that I found somebody that is a phenomenal CEO and president, and he's running the company, and he's doing a much better job than I ever would. And for me, what I'm good at is doing all the things that he's not doing that I should be focused on. And so that's been sort of my growth and entrepreneurship journey, to realizing that, doing everything yourself all at one time is okay and it's good, but you're only going to grow so much, because you have to learn to delegate. You have to learn to give people opportunities, and then you have to hire people that are better than you to come in these positions, and then let them go and watch what they do. And that's in every aspect of the company.
When did you start to make that shift from execution?
In 22.
Yeah.
So in 21, I shifted from execution. Well, really in 2019, I sort of got out of execution. And then in 2020, it was less the whole different ballgame, right? That we, for a second, I thought we were going to lose the firm, because revenues had dropped almost like 60% in Q2 of 2020 versus Q2 of 2019. And then so 20, I was sort of trying to get out of that, put the business back on solid footing. And then 21 is when I actually, we're locked in, and we started a new division, the investment bank. We got our welcome letter from FINRA in 2020. And in 2021 was when all that heavy lifting was behind me. We stabilized the firm, we grew it back, we sort of launched a new division. And then 21, and we're still stuck at home, right? It's still COVID, right? So you're not going out as much. So I started really digging into higher education and realizing that there's like, if this is it, if I'm not going to grow anymore, this kind of sucks. Like I value education. I value learning. I value reading about things and kind of, developing my own knowledge. And I like reading books that people write, but I always find those have an angle that author is trying to push. So I prefer more academic books where it's like research based and it talks about a whole perspective of things. And I started taking online courses. And at that time, these courses normally are in person, but they were often virtually. So I was like, what do I have to do? It's like $10,000, $15,000. Let me see what happens. And I took one, and then that's another one. It ultimately led to a point where in 2022, my family and I decided that we should move and leave LA and move up to Santa Barbara for a number of reasons. But one big part of it was for me to step out of the business, like physically, like literally. If I'm coming into the office and everybody sees me, they still look to me.
It doesn't create that space for the new person to establish their role.
Exactly. I didn't know at that point that I was going to hire a CEO and president, but I just knew that if I want this thing to grow, it has to get to a point where people are feeling empowered and people are coming in and doing a much better job than I would in all functions. And we made that decision. And then in 22, when I started my first unit of this program, came back and I really transitioned to what we call functional management from managing my management committee. And my whole perspective on leadership through this whole process has changed as well. And I think I've grown significantly in the last 2 years, call it, than ever in my life in terms of just forget the technical side of things, because understanding the technical knowledge is important, but it's not critical. It's the thing that people discount, like the soft skills, the people skills, the ability to be able to see those things at a higher level. That's what's the hard part, and that, in my opinion, the really important stuff.
Let's shift over to culture and mission. How do you think about the mission of the firm? And I ask that because I struggle with balancing being very socially oriented with, am I just making another video for a private equity firm to raise fund 2 to fund 3 to get another billion? Like, is this what I want to do with our lives and the team? But we've realized that our mission, that might've been like 3 and 4 years ago, but our mission has evolved so much since then. And our values have actually been documented versus, chicken scratch on a journal. But I'm curious maybe how your mission, vision, and values have kind of iterated over time and where they're at today.
So that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of time being spent, like there's these, business school case studies, like, okay, you got to have a mission and a vision and a value statement. And before you start a business, you got to do all that. And a lot of times I find we had one and it became this thing, like it's this page, it's somewhere in your files, and maybe there's a copy of it on everybody's desk, but nobody really knows it. Or if they see it, they read the words, they understand what the words mean, but they don't really get it. And so our mission is very simple now. It is that we are a value creation firm. That's what we say, because I want the mission to be broad enough that you can pivot in different directions, but be critical enough that is this going to help create value? Is this going to help create value for us? Is it going to help create value for our clients? Is it going to help create value for our shareholders? Is it going to help create value for other stakeholders? That's the easy part, right? That's we don't talk a lot about that, but what we do talk about, and what I think here for me the distinction is that yes, your mission is important, but really it's your core values are far more important than your mission. And we went through a whole process in 21. And we redid our core values because we had 7 core values. There were 7 words that I couldn't even recite for you if I had to pull up my notes. And now we have 5 core values, which are palm tree quality, palm tree first, rooted in integrity, perspective, perceptive, and stay frosty. And it was a whole process. We worked with a really good friend of mine who his whole thing is core values. He's got a book on it. And it was like a multi-day process where me and some of the senior stakeholders in the company sat in a room and revalued and came up with what these core values were. And now everybody can recite those core values, but underneath each one, we have several statements that further explain what it means. And every time we hire people, we group them in groups of, we wait until we have like 4 or 5 new hires. We do a half-day core value rollout. And even when we first finalized the core values, we did a 2-day rollout for everybody. We flew everybody in, and we did this because every decision that we make it with the core values. Do we hire? Do we fire? Do we promote? do we do this? Do we expand? Whatever we do, we go back to those core values, because your core values should be something that never change, and they should be planted in concrete. And that's sort of our perspective on it. And it's working for us.
And even the clients that you do want to work with and clients you don't want to work with, because
Exactly.
if you work
100%.
with a client who pays you a lot, but it sucks the energy out of the team because they're just bad, they're just not good to work with. Like, we have had 2 of those projects out over 85 and 6 years where we're just like, hey, we can't really work with you any longer. It's not worth losing quality team members. But it's interesting on the values.
I've had many clients. I was going to say, I've had many meetings where I've, scheduled a meeting on a holiday early in the morning to accommodate a new client, and then you get there and they're like, they want the world and they don't want to pay for it. And it's like, come on, man, that just doesn't work like that. And so you're absolutely right.
It's interesting on the values part, because I found that it's iterated a lot over the past 6 years because of what we thought we truly valued in a team member and clients, or what was different about it. It's kind of evolved over time. And I think, like, one of the core things that we've established today is our first value is that we are passionate about our craft. And what that means is, yes, we are great marketers, but we're passionate about the craft of marketing, which means that people who are passionate don't start being passionate at 9 a.m. and stop being passionate at 5 p.m. They're obsessed with the craft. LeBron doesn't start thinking about basketball at 9 and stop thinking about it at 5. They figured out to weave it into their life because it's genuinely interesting to them. One of our colleagues, for example, texted me at like 10 a.m. on a Sunday when I'm at the Costco gas station line. She's like, hey, here's a thought on our new mission statement. What do you think about this? Like, that's an example of being passionate about the craft. So
That's right. And that's exactly, so for us, we have Palm Tree First. That's what that means. And so underneath that, we have a bunch of additional sentences. So for us, that would be like, we are passionate about our craft. So what you have, that would be that. Then it would say, we are passionate about our communities. We believe in developing our employees. I don't have all the other stuff underneath it committed to memory. I can share our 4 values with you after this call if you're interested. But it's because a lot of these things you think about, there is a higher level above them all. And we had all the folks, it was like 5 of us sitting in the room, and we were arguing, going back and forth about things, and we all did an exercise on our own where we ranked our values, and then we had a facilitator walk us through it. It wasn't a cheap exercise for us to do that, to bring this facilitator, whose book he's my friend, and he wrote the book, so that's how I was connected with him. But I think it's been phenomenal, because we had a hard time articulating what makes us really unique and what makes our culture so great. And through this process, we were able to, and I'm very proud of it. We have it big. If you ever come to our offices, I'm happy to show you. We have them big on the walls, and and even the logos that represent each value, we developed as a team together on one of our corporate offsites, where everybody sat in their tables. They all sort of worked out creating a logo that represented that value, and then they fought for it across the whole company, and ultimately we picked 5, and then we had our the 5 winners, and then we gave our marketing firm to update it.
Yeah, and this idea of passion is interesting, right? Because I think it's Cal Newport had it in one of his books, this section kind of rejecting the idea of follow your passion, because a lot of people don't know what their passion is until they've actually had time to develop mastery in a particular function, in a particular industry and size and shape, and then the passion follows after that. But it's hard to develop passion unless you're putting in the time and effort to discover that mastery. So this kind of leads maybe to the next question, which is, how do you think about motivating a junior team, the analysts and the associates, to think bigger picture, as opposed to like, why am I working 80, 90 hours a week? Like, what is this doing for my life? Like, how do you try to keep the big picture in perspective for the team?
So we have a very collaborative, positive, culture. We spend and I would say our culture is our biggest component, but not because as the most important component, and not because I'm the CEO and chairman and saying this, but if you grab anybody out of Palm Tree at random, they will tell you that the culture here is great. And the reason the culture is great, and then I'm getting to your question, is that we really mean it. You know, you've got me as the founder, who's now the chairman and CEO. You've got my co-founder, Dave Walensky, who, you know, he was the third person that joined me and my partner when I first started the company. And then when I separated, we joke and say in the divorce, he came with me. And he is running talent for the organization, and he's touching all of our employees. And we made some promises to one another when we started the company, and we sat down when we started, when we built it, and we do those things. And it's a true, genuine culture where we promote people when they're ready, not based on certain years and of time they have to put in. We give people opportunities. We have complete transparency. We have a quarterly update for the whole company where we show revenue and gross profit, and we kind of talk about our strategy. We all have an open door policy. We sit down and talk with people. You know, we're trying to get people back into the office, but it's easier to sort of sit down and talk to folks. But we do a lot of things to be able to enable interaction with from the junior folks with the senior folks, and you know, no question is off limits, and people ask questions, and then we can talk about that, and we answer them. And we also have the equity plan now that we started giving stock actually in the company and to people above the VP level that participate in that, and they have they're meeting their owners of the company now, and they have if there ever is, you know, as we continue to create value, they'll participate in that.
Yeah, that's has been front of mind for us. I mean, how do you think that we should start to approach that type of plan? Because right now we have 11 people, my wife and I are co-CEOs, and then we have 7 on the account team and 2 on the video team, but, you know, relatively a junior heavy team. But how do we, are the key components of creating an incentive structure that does encourage people to see a future that's more than 2 years, 4 years, 5 years?
There's a lot of ways to do that, and we could spend the whole day talking about that. I spent a lot of time sort of digging into my network through YPO and through the business school program, and then through a lot of attorneys that I talked to. And there's a whole host of things you can do, but ultimately, and the reason I was doing that is because people were asking about it, and that's where you want to be. You want to have people asking questions about, hey, I've been here for a few years, I'm working hard, the company's growing, how can I participate in that growth? And for every company, it works different. It depends on a lot of questions that I don't have the answers to be able to give you advice. But I think it is something that you should think about, because in today's world where people have choices to go and work wherever they want, it's important to be able to put your money where your mouth is and say, hey, I'm going to reward you for doing what I'm asking you to do, because if you do what I'm asking of you to do, we're all going to grow, and we're all going to sort of create wealth, because, you know, putting aside the salary and the bonus that we get, but there is this long-term incentive compensation that, hey, you're in it. There's no guarantees what happens, right? But if we do things right, history has shown that it does work. And it was challenging for us, and probably for you as well, because we're not a tech company that Amazon or Google is going to come by for some ridiculous valuation. It's a people business. And, a lot of times, unless something happens, these things could be worth nothing, right? But there's ways to think about it, all that stuff. And I'm happy to chat with you if you're really interested about it offline.
Yeah, we are, because it goes back to our name, 5149. It the core of that message is to give more than you receive. And that's to be long-term in relationships. That's why 51 vets, 51 labs, everything is about that mentality of being long-term focused. Maybe shifting over to, you say that you're a lecturer, if you had to give your final lecture at UCLA, and it is that one message that people are going to remember 20 years from now, like, what is that one message that you want people to remember 20 years from your final guest lecture at UCLA?
I think that's a good question, because the lecture that I give is on building the business, but pulling high up, I think if I look back on my life and why I've been successful and sort of why I'm able to do what I'm doing is that there's no easy answer. There's no overnight success. There's no, I joked and said it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. And, so you have to, in order for you to be able to put the time in and to be an entrepreneur and to kind of do all that stuff, you got to have passion. Because if you're in here and saying, hey, I just want to go and make a lot of money, there's so many things that happen to you along the way that test that and make you really look in the mirror and go, why am I really doing this when it's not working so well? So I think having that passion that's going to fuel your stamina, that's going to fuel your energy, that's going to allow you to continue doing what you're doing, I think is really important. And then sort of equal with that, maybe slightly higher, it's people in relationships. Who do you know in your network? Who do you reach out to ask for help? Who's working with you? And how are you leading those relationships? And I think the concept of leadership is one that doesn't get talked about enough. And we always think of a leader as like, oh, somebody that's in a power position and we all look up to. No, everybody is a leader. Everybody is a leader. We're all leaders. Even our children, they're leaders in the way they do things and what they do in school and at home. And being able to understand that. And for me, my perception of leadership has really changed from over the last sort of since I founded the company to where I'm at now. And it's kind of like what you're talking about in that I now 100% wholeheartedly believe in servant leadership. And my job as a leader of the company is to make sure that everybody that's here is feeling empowered and able to work and do their job and succeed at it. And that's my job. My job is to make sure everybody that I've picked, you got to make sure you're picking the right people and put them in the right seats and that they're capable, to do what you want them to do. There's a book I read that said, do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to do it? So do they have all that?
EOS, the traction book?
EOS, the traction book. Yeah, well, I read it. We didn't implement it because I found our business was a little bit more complicated to use that system for it. But so you put the people in but that's just part of the battle. The rest of it is getting them excited to come to work, getting out of their way to do their job, and then watching them grow. I mean, I think that's the biggest part of leadership. If you want to be in the limelight, you want to go out and say, I'm the chairman and CEO. I sometimes don't even say my title because I'm like, I was actually very embarrassed about changing my title to chairman and CEO because I'm like, look, that doesn't feel right. But we kind of have to do that to signal both inside and outside the company as how my role is evolving and kind of what I'm doing. But ultimately, that's true leadership. And that's the thing I want people to take away is that at the end of the day, it's all people. And with all this talk about AI and robots coming and taking our jobs, yes, robots are going to come and help us do our jobs better. But at the end of the day, it's this human interaction, it's this human connection and the impact with one another that we have that makes things and changes things and shifts things either for the better or for the worse, right? And that's what I would want people to walk away with and remember that.
So what are some things that people could do this week, next week, to really take action on that in terms of it's all about the people? What does that mean to the analyst at Palm Tree? What does that mean to the VP at Palm Tree?
You have a question on your mind about something, you don't have the answers, don't ask the analyst next to you or the VP next to you. Go and ask somebody more senior than you. Say, hey, this is bothering me. Let's talk about it. Because more often than not, where there's always three conversations that are happening, right? The conversation I'm having in my head, the conversation you're having in your head, and the conversation we are going to have. And, you can reach out and say, hey, I want to catch up. And sit down and say, hey, I've been thinking about this and this doesn't make sense to me. Why? Right? If you're working with good people that are honest and they're not hiding anything from you, then there's usually a good answer for why something is happening that you don't understand. Similarly, reach out to people outside your network. And you're thinking about somebody, you've got that old mentor, that old boss, that old friend, that old college professor, just connect with them, talk with them, chat with them. Life isn't transactional. We don't graduate from university and then go to work and then leave our job and go to the next one. These are relationships that we're building, and they go back and forth, and they feed one another, and it's important to be able to maintain those. Obviously, we don't have infinite time, so you do have to be thoughtful about where you're going into. I haven't reached out to my English professor from college, but I have reached out to my finance professor, right? And so that there is that distinction, because you don't have infinite time.
Well, shifting gears just a little bit, if one of your friends challenged you to raise some money for charity, and the only way that you could raise $50,000 is for you to do a 3-minute open mic comedy that you could not get out of, what would you talk about in that open mic set?
Well, you don't want me to do that right now, right?
You could go into it.
I'm not going to get into it. But I think that's a funny one, because I'm kind of a serious individual. But I do have a funny side, and I do crack jokes, but I'm usually very serious in especially when there's other people around. But despite that, I'm pretty clumsy. So like, I'll spill things, I'll knock things down. So a 3-minute open mic would be me just talking about, hey, imagine this situation, and then this happened, and everybody would be in stitches laughing, because I've done some silly things just because I'm a little clumsy, spill things or spill on people or knock things over or stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and also like in entrepreneurship, I mean, dear, that there's an entire 1-hour set right there on entrepreneurship.
That's right.
I mean, it's interesting because like all of the different pieces of our lives, there are different ways to take perspective on it. Of like, I'm married to a Chinese woman. Her parents are ruthless to me. I hadn't seen him for like 4 years. I picked him up at the airport. The first thing that they said is, you gained weight. I was like, well, I love you too. And then the second thing they said is, your Chinese got worse. I'm like, wow, I can bring you back to the airport. I'm more than happy to. It's funny because there's just so much material from our lives and the day-to-day lives that it's about having just a different perspective on it. And it's also quite humbling. Like, my wife is also like, not only is she chief CEO, like co-CEO, co-founder, CFO, but she's like chief humbler for us. Like, it's ruthless and 100% necessary. She's like, you've done 14 marathons and 4 Ironmans, but you still don't have abs. Like, how is this possible? And it's like, you know what? I knew there's a reason why we're married. This is really just not about comedy set. It's really just for me to vent here. That's really the purpose of this entire podcast.
That's great. I appreciate that.
Well, on the last question we can end with, which is like, let's fast forward just a few years, and it is your 100th birthday, and this is going to be like the most epic birthday. And you have like level 10 energy from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. on your 100th birthday. What does that 100th birthday look like, and how can we make it absolutely epic?
I think about that a lot. Not my 100th birthday, but throwing a party, and I think, like, for our wedding, believe it or not, I had more guests on my guest list than my wife did, and that's after cutting like half of them off. And I've got so many friends from so many different periods of my life, and so for me, my 100th birthday, I would want to be, hopefully, I'm successful enough where I can have like up to 1,000 people at my home at a party or someplace, if I don't have a home that big, like outside. And it would be a very grand affair where everybody would come and would be able to just be there to have fun and celebrate. But then there would be a core group in advance of that. It would be like a weekend affair, and there would be a core group, because you're not close with 1,000 people. And you may have been close at a moment, but then you sort of go our separate directions, and then you go into different things. So I would have a smaller, intimate setting for that core group of people, whatever the number is, and then have a big elaborate event afterwards, kind of like a wedding, right? A big wedding. And when you said that, the image that popped in my head is, I don't know if you've ever seen Meet Joe Black, that movie, where which is one of my favorite movies. And it's at his daughter's wedding, and it's the end where he leaves with the devil or whatever the guy is, Brad Pitt's character. That kind of thing, that kind of event where everybody's happy, having a good time, and you look back, you're like, you don't know if you're gonna live how much longer beyond 100, but looking back and going, you know what, everybody's here, my kids, my grandkids, maybe my great grandkids, I don't know, my friends, people that have been in my life, and they're all here because they want to be here, so they have good feelings towards me, and they don't think ill of me. And two, we're all having a good time together, celebrating life.
That's awesome. There we go. Well, we have covered a lot of ground in this episode, and I'm glad it took the direction that it did. And I really appreciate you taking the time for this.
Thank you so much. This was great. It was a very nice podcast. I appreciated your energy, and I was speaking from the heart. So hopefully your listeners will enjoy it.